The jar hit the driveway and shattered so cleanly that the strawberry preserve spread across the concrete, like a stain no one could look away from. Cliff stood at the edge of the front steps, still gripping the remaining 4 jars by their wire handles, the little paper labels swaying. Opal had made those labels herself, handwritten in her careful cursive. Opal's Summer Preserves, made with love, Prince Edward County. $75. His voice carried across the yard to where 20-odd relatives sat along the folding tables, paper plates balanced on their laps. You went to that market this morning and you took $75 from strangers. While I was here setting up for this whole afternoon, while I spent my own money on the meat, and you took money. Opal stood at the bottom of the steps, with jam on her sandal and both hands held very still at her sides. She was still wearing her apron. She had just come in from the kitchen when he found the envelope tucked in the pocket of her garden coat. They bought the jam, she said quietly. I made 12 jars, they paid me for them. You embarrassed me. Cliff's voice dropped in the way it always did right before something worse came. You went and sold things like we're broke, like I can't put food on this table. My cousin was at that market this morning, Opal. He called me. He said, is that Opal at the booth there? And I didn't even know you'd gone. Greta had been standing at the side gate with her overnight bag still over her shoulder. She had arrived from Toronto an hour ago, later than she'd promised because of construction, on the 401 around Belleville. She had come straight around the back without going through the house. She had not even set her bag down. She watched her mother stand there, 1 jar of work destroyed against the driveway, and she watched her father set the remaining 4 very deliberately on the top step. Not because he cared about them, because it would be worse to know they were still there, unbroken, just out of reach. I needed the money, Opal said. She kept her voice level. Brody called me last week. Don't put Brody in this. Cliff came down the steps. He wasn't loud anymore, which was worse. Whatever your son needs is not a reason for you to go selling things like a vendor. You want money, you asked me. You said no, Opal said simply. I asked you on Tuesday and you said no. The yard had gone completely quiet. Greta's Aunt Irene, who had been laughing about something with the woman beside her, had stopped mid-sentence. One of her cousins was staring at the broken jar on the driveway. Nobody moved. And then Cliff reached out and took the envelope from Opal's apron pocket. Not the way you take something that's offered. The other way. Greta dropped her bag by the gate. She had known something was wrong the night before. Opal's voice over the phone had that particular flatness to it, the one that only showed up when she was trying to protect Greta from whatever she was already carrying alone. I was just calling to see if you're still coming tomorrow, Opal had said. Of course, I told you I would. Greta had been at her kitchen table in the junction, marking up a campaign brief. Are you okay? It's late? I'm fine. I just wanted to make sure you'd be here early. Before the food's ready, if you can manage it. You know how your dad gets if there aren't enough hands. Mom, what's going on? A pause. Nothing, sweetheart. Get some sleep. You sound tired. You called me at 11 on a Thursday to make sure I was coming to a barbecue. I wanted to hear your voice. Is that so strange? Another pause, softer. Could you stop somewhere and pick up some good vanilla? The kind in the glass bottle. The grocery stores near here don't carry it anymore. Greta had written it down. Then she'd sat with her phone in her hand for a long time after the call ended, listening to her upstairs neighbor, walking back and forth across the kitchen floor. She'd left Toronto at 5 in the morning. She stopped for the vanilla at a shop in Picton. When she arrived, she could see light in the kitchen window from the road, and she knew Opal had been up since at least 3. That was how it always went. Every family gathering, every holiday, every birthday. Opal cooked. She had always cooked. She cooked from before the sun came up, worked the whole morning and half the afternoon, and by the time everyone sat down to eat, her eyes were bloodshot from the heat, and her back had that particular curve to it that meant she was past tired and running on something else. Something quieter and harder. The first time Greta had tried to help, she'd been maybe 9 or 10, she'd reached for the big wooden spoon, and Opal had gently moved her hand away. Go play with your cousins. I'm faster on my own. She had said it kindly, and Greta had believed her for years. It had taken her much longer to understand that her mother worked alone not because she was faster, but because it was the only part of the day that belonged to her. When Greta crossed the yard and put herself between her father and her mother, the whole garden seemed to shift. Put the money back, she said. Cliff looked at her the way he always had, like she was 12 again. She had spent a long time letting that work on her. Stay out of this, Greta. This is between your mother and me. She earned that money. Give it back. She embarrassed this family, and she left this house without telling me where she was going. He glanced around the yard, and Greta understood the gesture. He was reminding everyone watching that he was the wronged party here, the reasonable one. The one who had merely asked a simple question. I'm her husband. I provide for her. She doesn't need to sell things. She asked you for money on Tuesday, Greta said. You said no. So she made something with her own hands and sold it. To help your brother, Opal said from behind her. That's all it was, Cliff. Brody needed. I said leave your brother out of this. Brody needed $800, Greta said, her voice steady. She had talked to Brody herself 2 weeks ago. She knew exactly what for. For a car repair he said was urgent, except we both know it wasn't a car repair, it was his betting account, and you knew that too, and you still didn't want to help him, and you didn't want Mom to help him either. So she made jam and sold it at a market on a Saturday morning before your guests arrived. And she was back here by 9 o'clock. And somehow this is what we're talking about at a family barbecue. Something moved across Cliff's face. Not guilt. She had given up looking for guilt years ago, but something else. The particular expression of a person who realizes the audience isn't responding the way they expected. Her Aunt Irene stood up from her folding chair. Greta, he's your father, this is between the two of them. I know. Greta turned to look at her, and 30 seconds ago you were all sitting there watching him take money out of her pocket, and nobody said a word, so I'm saying it. Irene sat back down. Greta turned to her mother. Let's go inside. She made Opal sit at the kitchen table. She cleaned the jam off her sandal with a paper towel and poured her a glass of water, and then stood there because she didn't know what else to do. Opal held the glass with both hands. The mark on the side of her wrist where Cliff had grabbed her, it was already fading. It always did. Mom, I'm all right. I know you are. Greta sat across from her. Where did the money go? He kept it. Opal looked at her hands. He said he'd return it to the people who bought it. He's not going to do that. I know. They sat quietly for a moment. Outside, the sounds of the barbecue slowly resumed. Someone turned the music back up. There was laughter from somewhere near the back fence. Tell me about Brody, Greta said. Opal's jaw shifted. He called me 3 weeks ago. He said he owed money to someone and he needed it quickly. He was embarrassed to tell you. He wasn't embarrassed enough not to ask you. He's my son. He's 29 years old. I know how old he is. Opal looked out the window at the yard, where she could just see the edge of the folding tables, all those people who had come to eat what she had spent the morning making. I know exactly how old he is. I was there. Greta looked at her mother's hands on the glass. The skin was dry across the knuckles from all the winter and all the washing up and all the years. She had her own grandmother's ring on her right hand. The left one had been bare since the clasp on her wedding band broke 4 years ago. And Cliff had said there was no money to get it fixed. Mom, she said again more carefully, how long has it been like this? Opal was quiet for a long moment. Which part? She finally asked. After everyone had gone, after the tables were folded and the yard was cleared, which Greta had done herself, which had taken an hour, and which Cliff had watched from the porch without offering to help, Greta drove her mother into Picton for dinner. It was a small place, white tablecloths, candles in little glass holders. The kind of place Greta went on her own, sometimes when she wanted to feel like a person rather than a deadline. Opal sat with her hands in her lap and looked at the menu for a very long time. Order whatever you want, Greta said. I'm looking. I know. Take your time. When the food came, Opal had ordered lamb chops. She looked at her plate when it arrived. 2 chops, perfectly seared, with rosemary and roasted carrots alongside, and she didn't say anything for a moment. Mom, is it okay? It's fine. Her voice was a little strange. I make lamb every Christmas. Your dad gets the good cuts, the chops, the leg. The kids always got the ribs when you were young. I used to get whatever was left, usually the neck. I'd make a broth with it. She looked at the plate. I don't think I've ever actually eaten a lamb chop. Greta felt something tighten in her chest and stay there. Then eat it slowly, she said. You've got time. They talked through the whole evening. Opal talked about things Greta had never heard. About the summer she was 22 and she'd entered a preserving competition at the county fair and won first place for her black currant jam, and the woman running the booth had told her she should sell professionally, that she had a real talent for it. About the little shop she'd imagined, someday with her name on a chalk sign out front. About the copper pot she'd inherited from her grandmother, the one she used every August when the fruit was ready, and how Cliff had sold it at a garage sale 12 years ago, without asking, because he thought she wouldn't notice. "Did you say anything?" Greta asked. "I cried in the bathroom," Opal said simply. "Then I came out and made dinner." Greta put her fork down. She reached across the table and covered her mother's hand. "Mom, do you want to leave him?" Opal looked at her. It was a long, quiet look, the kind that had whole decades in it. "I don't know what I'd do," she said finally. "I've been there 38 years. I don't know who I am anywhere else." "You're the person who won a blue ribbon at the county fair," Greta said. "You're the person who figured out how to make $75 from 12 jars when nobody was paying attention. You're the person sitting in this restaurant eating lamb chops for the first time." She squeezed her hand. "You'd figure out the rest." 3 days after Greta went back to Toronto, her mother called at 7 in the morning. "I told him I want a divorce," Opal said. Greta sat up in bed. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine. I'm standing in the kitchen." He went outside. She paused. He threw his coffee mug. "It didn't hit me. It hit the backsplash." "Okay, listen to me. Do you want to leave right now? I can be there by noon." "No." Opal's voice was steadier than Greta expected. "I need to do this part properly. I called Brody this morning first. He told me I was being dramatic." "Of course he did." "And then Irene called. I don't know how she heard already. Maybe Cliff called her, and she said I should pray about it and remember my vows." A short pause. "I reminded her that his vow was to cherish me." She changed the subject. Greta pressed her palm against her forehead. "What do you need from me?" "I need you to not tell me I'm making a mistake." "You're not making a mistake." "I know," Opal exhaled. "I just needed to hear you say it." The weeks that followed were the kind no one prepared you for. Cliff called everyone he knew. Relatives appeared at the house. There were 2 afternoons where Greta drove up from Toronto and sat beside her mother in the living room, while various aunts and neighbors and her mother's church friends explained, each in their own way, why a woman of Opal's age should be more reasonable. "You've built a life together," one of them said. "You don't throw away 38 years. "She didn't throw anything away," Greta said. "He did, 1 jar at a time for 38 years. Brody came once, with Tamara, and they sat across from Opal at the kitchen table, with the expressions of people who had rehearsed what they were going to say. He talked about family and legacy and what this would do to his future kids. He didn't have any yet, but the point stood, apparently. And when he ran out of reasons, he looked at his mother and said, "Mom, you've always put us first. Don't stop now." Opal looked at him for a long moment. "That's exactly why I'm doing this," she said. Brody opened his mouth. "I put you first," Opal said. "I put everyone first. And I'm going to be 60 years old in 3 years, and I have never once in my adult life bought something with money I earned myself and kept. Do you understand that? Not once." She looked at her hands on the table. "Your father took $75 out of my apron pocket in front of your cousins and your neighbors and people I've known for 20 years. And everyone watched." She looked up. "I'm done being watched." Brody and Tamara drove back to Kingston that evening without staying for dinner. Tamara did not look at Greta on the way out, but Greta noticed her squeeze Opal's hand briefly at the door. It wasn't much. It was something. The relatives who had come to talk Opal out of it mostly stopped calling by September. A few of them, the ones Greta had expected least, sent small texts over the winter. "How are you settling in? Thinking of you." Her Aunt Irene, who had said all the wrong things in August, sent a card in December with just, "I think I understand now. I'm sorry it took me so long." Opal put the card on the windowsill of the spare room, where the morning light hit it. The divorce took 4 months to finalize. Cliff made every stage of it as difficult as he could. Delays, arguments about the house, about the contents of the house. Opal let him have most of it. She took her preserving equipment. She'd found a replacement copper pot at an estate sale in Belleville, a good one, heavier than the original, and her winter clothes, and a box of photographs and the vanilla in the glass bottle that Greta had brought her the morning everything fell apart. She moved into Greta's spare room in the Junction in October, when the maples along the street were the color of the jam she'd been making since she was 18 years old. She was always awake before Greta. But for the first time she was cooking for herself, for the two of them, for the pleasure of it, not as a service rendered. The first morning she made proper oatmeal with cinnamon and sliced pears. and put two bowls on the table. And when Greta came out half asleep and found it there, she had to stand in the doorway a moment before she could say anything. "You didn't have to do this," she said. "I wanted to," Opal said. And the difference between those two things, the want and the have to, had never seemed so large. It was Greta who found the listing for the Saturday market at the Witchwood Barns. Juried market, artisan food vendors, outdoor season April through November. "Mom," she said, setting her laptop on the kitchen table beside Opal's tea. "Look at this." Opal read the listing twice. "I'd have to make a lot more than 12 jars," she said. "Yes. I'd need to source fruit, properly, and labels, and some kind of a table setup." "Yes. That costs money," she looked up. "I don't have money." "I do," Greta said. "Consider it a loan. 0% interest payable whenever." Opal was quiet for a moment. Then she turned back to the screen and read the application instructions a third time. "I'd put my name on it," she said almost to herself. "My real name." "That's the idea." The jury accepted her the following Wednesday. She came out of the spare room holding her phone and found Greta in the kitchen and didn't say anything. Just held the phone up so she could see the email. The first market day was a Saturday in April, cold the way April in Toronto always is, the kind of cold that pretends it's almost over but isn't. Opal had been awake since 4. By 7 she had 16 varieties of preserve, labeled and packed, and a hand-painted sign propped by the door. "Opal's, handcrafted preserves, Prince Edward County." By noon she had sold out of everything except 2 jars of the rhubarb ginger. By noon there was a small lineup at her table. By noon, the woman in the next stall, a beekeeper named Lucille, 63, originally from Thunder Bay, had come over twice on the pretense of borrowing a pen and stayed each time to talk about the consistency of Opal's set. "My grandmother's method," Opal told her. "Low and slow, most people rush the pectin." Lucille nodded the way people do when they've just had something confirmed that they'd suspected for years. "You should come back next week." "I'm already signed up for next week," Opal said. She drove home with Greta that afternoon and said almost nothing the whole way, watching the city go by out the passenger window. But when they pulled into the alley behind the apartment and Greta turned off the engine, Opal sat for a moment before getting out. "I need to tell you something," she said. Greta waited. "I made $412 today." Opal looked at her. "In my life, I have never had $400 that was mine, that I made and kept." She paused. "I didn't know what it would feel like." "What does it feel like?" Opal thought about it. "Like standing up straight," she said. Cliff lasted 6 weeks on his own before he called Brody. Brody drove out to the house once and stayed a weekend, but Tamara had grown quieter over the autumn, and when she told him she thought they needed to have a serious conversation about a few things, he came home early. He wasn't ready to be his father's caretaker yet. He was barely ready to be his own. Word came back through the family grapevine, the way word always did in those small Ontario towns, moving from porch to phone call to front step conversation, that Cliff had taken to eating at the diner on Main Street most evenings because he couldn't manage the stove reliably, that he'd hired a woman from the next road to clean the house twice a month and had complained about her work so much she'd quit, that he walked around town with his hands clasped behind his back the way he always had, but that lately people found reasons not to stop and chat the way they used to. The neighbors who had whispered about Opal, taking money from strangers, were quiet on the subject now. In the spring, Greta's company let her move to hybrid, and she bought a second-hand car. On Saturdays, she drove her mother to the Witchwood market and sat at the cafe next door with her laptop, and sometimes she looked up through the window and watched Opal talking to customers, leaning across the table to describe the difference between wild blueberry and cultivated, her hands moving the way they always did when she was explaining something she loved. She looked younger than she had the summer before. Not the kind of younger that came from a haircut or a new coat. The kind that came from somewhere underneath, from not carrying something heavy every hour of every day. One Saturday in June, Lucille introduced her to a man named Peter, who had a small orchard out past Milton, and was looking for a producer to take some of his surplus plums. He was widowed, unhurried in his speech, with the kind of quietness that came from spending a lot of time outside. He spent 20 minutes at Opal's table, asking about her process, and working through the samples she offered, seriously, the way someone who actually cared about flavor would. When he left, Lucille appeared at Opal's elbow immediately. "He asked about your hours," she said. My hours? Opal was already writing a new price tag. I'm here every Saturday 8 to 1. He can come by whenever. I don't think he was asking about jam hours, Opal. Opal looked up. Something crossed her face, uncertain, new, not entirely unwilling. I'm 60 in 2 years, she said. And, said Lucille. Opal didn't answer right away. She looked out across the market, at the stalls and the people moving between them, at the Saturday light cutting low across the old barn roof. Somewhere in the cafe next door was her daughter, sitting with a coffee and a laptop and occasionally glancing up to check that she was all right. She had spent 38 years in a house where her name was attached to nothing. No account, no deed, not even the jam she made with her own hands from her grandmother's recipe in a pot she was not allowed to keep. Her vendor's permit was clipped to the front of the table, laminated the way the market required. It said Opal Finch, Opal's handcrafted preserves, her name, her work, hers. I don't know yet, she told Lucille honestly. Which was true. And honest was something she was still learning, the particular kind of honest that meant speaking about what she actually wanted, rather than only what she'd been told she was allowed to want. Late is still better than never. She had thought it herself one of those early mornings in the spare room, watching the east light come through the window, listening to the city outside and feeling, for the first time in longer than she could measure, like she was exactly where she was meant to be. On her birthday in August, Greta drove her back to the same restaurant in Picton, white tablecloths, candles in little glass holders, and this time Opal ordered the lamb chops without looking at the menu first. She ate every bite and didn't mention the neck or the wings or the bones. On the drive home, they went along the county road, where the farms rolled out flat and gold on either side, and the sky in that part of Ontario in August was a particular kind of wide, the kind Opal had grown up looking at and had spent almost a year missing without quite saying so. Are you happy? Greta asked, not performing, just asking. Opal rested her arm on the open window ledge the way she used to when Greta was small, and they drove somewhere together, just the two of them, on errands that always seemed to take longer than they needed to, because neither of them was in a hurry to get back. She thought about the question the way she thought about a recipe, carefully without rushing it. I'm getting there, she said, and that's more than I've had in a very long time. The road ran straight ahead into the evening light, and the shadows of the trees fell long and quiet across the pavement, and for once, there was nowhere they needed to be, except exactly here, exactly this, moving forward together with the windows down, and the whole of the rest of it still ahead.